You know, every time there's some wild new breakthrough in AI or robotics, this really old fear pops back up. Is a machine going to take my job? It's a question we've been asking for centuries, but for some reason, this time, it just feels different.
Okay, let's just kick things off with a quote that, well, it gets right to the point. This isn't some academic theory. This is a stark prediction from the CEO of Ford. And look, when you hear something like that, it forces you to ask that big question. Is this time really different?
So, this thing we're talking about, it actually has a name: technological unemployment. It's pretty straightforward. It's what happens when new tech, whether it's a robot on an assembly line or an AI writing code, just makes human jobs, well, unnecessary.
Now, I know AI feels like this super modern 21st century thing, right? But the fear it's stirring up? Oh, that is ancient. This anxiety about machines taking our place has a long and honestly a pretty fascinating history.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It really shows you how long we've been having this same argument. We're talking ancient Rome, where an emperor literally blocked new tech to save jobs. Fast forward to 16th century England. Queen Elizabeth I was worried a simple knitting machine would cause mass poverty. Of course, you've got the Luddites in the 1800s, who famously smashed the machines they thought were replacing them. And then, in the 1930s, the great economist John Maynard Keynes gave the fear its modern name, though he kind of brushed it off as just a temporary phase. The point is, this tension between progress and jobs, it's always been there.
So, for centuries, people have been predicting disaster. And yet, here we are. Mass unemployment from tech just hasn't happened. And that brings us to the optimist side of the argument, the belief that technology, in the long run, is actually a job-creating machine. The whole argument for Team Optimist really boils down to something called the Luddite fallacy. The idea is basically that worrying about machines causing permanent unemployment is a mistake. I mean, for over 200 years, productivity has gone through the roof, but we've always managed to create new jobs. So how does that actually work? Well, economists talk about these compensation effects. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty intuitive. First off, somebody has to design, build, and fix the new machines, right? That's jobs. Then, as tech makes stuff cheaper, we all have a little extra cash to spend on other things, and that demand creates more jobs. Companies also take the money they save from automation and invest in new projects, hiring new people. And then, and this is the big one, innovation just creates entirely new industries out of thin air. Think about it. Jobs like social media manager or drone pilot didn't even exist a few decades ago.
Okay, that's the happy story. It's the one that's held true for a couple of hundred years. But what if it's not true anymore? The pessimists are out there saying that with AI, the old rules just don't apply. This time, they warn, is different.
This slide, right here, this is the core of the whole debate. The key difference, the pessimists say, is what's being automated. In the past, machines replaced our muscles. A tractor, a steam engine, they did physical work. But today's AI, it's automating our brain power. It's starting to think, and it's learning and changing so fast. The big question is, can we humans possibly adapt and retrain quickly enough to keep up?
And then you have this really provocative idea from the late anthropologist David Graeber. He basically argued that, yeah, we did get rid of a lot of useful jobs through automation, but instead of working less, we just invented a whole bunch of new, often pointless-sounding administrative jobs to keep the system going. It's a huge challenge to the idea that every new job created is a good or necessary one.
All right, so who's right? Let's look at the data. And well, this is where things get messy. Honestly, even the experts can't seem to agree on what's coming. Okay, back in 2013, Oxford University dropped an absolute bombshell of a study. They came out with this number, 47%. They said nearly half of all jobs in the US were at high risk of being automated away. And that number, that really lit a fire under this whole debate. But then, just a few years later, the OECD comes along and says, hold on a second. Their number? 9%. 9. That is a gigantic difference. So which is it? Are we talking about a catastrophe or just a manageable shift? The fact that two major studies can be so far apart shows you just how hard this stuff is to predict. And it gets even more complicated, because this risk isn't spread out evenly across the globe. Not even close. You look at a study like this, and you see that in a place like Romania, the risk is seen as being over 60%. But in Sweden, it's lower. It really suggests that a country's economy, its industries, and its social policies play a huge role in how all of this is going to shake out. And this, right here,
This is where the rubber really meets the road for a lot of people, because the risk is not shared equally. Not at all. Look at these numbers from the White House. If you're in a job that pays under $20 an hour, a staggering 83% of those jobs are considered at risk. But if your job pays over $40 an hour, that risk plummets to just 4%. This isn't just an economic debate anymore, it's a massive issue of social fairness and inequality.
So look, whether the real number is 9% or 47%, it doesn't really matter. We are facing a massive, massive change. So the real question becomes, what are we going to do about it? This isn't like a hurricane we just have to endure. It's a challenge that we have to meet head on. So what are the big ideas on the table? Well, they run the gamut from stuff that sounds pretty familiar, like more education and job retraining, all the way to some really radical ideas. People are talking about universal basic income, or UBI, shortening the work week to spread the work around, big government projects to create jobs, or even changing who owns the technology itself, so more people get a piece of the profits from all this automation.
So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway here? I think it's this. Technology itself isn't good or bad. It's just a tool. The future of work isn't some pre-written destiny we're hurtling towards. It's going to be the result of a million choices that we are all making right now.
At the end of the day, these amazing tools, they're just that. They're tools. But they force us to ask a really fundamental question. We can take all this new productivity and build a world with more free time and shared wealth, or we can let it create a world with deeper inequality and social chaos. The tech isn't in the driver's seat. We are. So, what kind of world are we going to build?